What's going on, Security Ninjas? Samuel here, and I like to hack things. Have you heard of pen testing or penetration testing? It's one of the most commonly sought after careers in cybersecurity. Today, I'm joined by Phillip Wylie, one of the most well known and talented penetration testers in the industry today. He's going to share some insight into how he got started and how he got to where he is today, and hopefully, how you can get to that same point. All right, let's get to the interview. Welcome, everyone, to the What is Pen Testing interview. I'm here with Phillip Wylie, one of the most well known pen testers in the industry today. He's going to come and share some of his insight and how he got started and how you can possibly get to where he's at today. So, Phillip, why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself?
Hey, thanks for having me, Samuel. For the audience out there, I'm Phillip Wylie. I have as far as certifications go in pen testing, I have my OSCP and SANS GWAPT certs. I got my start back in my AutoCAD drafting days. I did AutoCAD drafting and went to trade school for that. And then I found out during my AutoCAD or my CAD drafting career that I had more of a knack for the computer side of things. So I taught myself how to build computers as I got more interested in it. And then I took a Novell NetWare certification course to get the old Novell NetWare, the CNE certification. I took that course, and then after a 90-day course of that, not certified yet, I got a job on a rolling out NetWare 4.1 and Windows 95 back in 97. And so I did sysadmin work for a little over 6 years. And then in 2004, January 2004, I moved into security, did network security for about a year and a half. The company hired a CISO and he put us into different silos. And fortunately, I got put into AppSec. In application security, I learned about penetration testing and vulnerability scanners, and that got me interested in it. And then in March 2012, I got laid off from my job of 14 years and applied to a company as a consultant doing penetration testing. So I started there, did consulting for about 5 years, got out of that, went to work for a bank doing penetration tests there for a while, and then went to work as a red teamer, and then actually back at the bank pen testing again. And back in 2018, I started teaching at Dallas College. So I taught for a while, and so taught for a little over 3.5 years. So I enjoy doing workshops at conferences and doing conference talks. And I have a book out called The Pen Tester Blueprint that shows you how to become a penetration tester. And that come from my class lecture, which turned into a conference talk about becoming a penetration tester.
Yeah, so a little bit of background so I met Phil back 2018, I think, maybe. We
Yep.
talked before. We both were giving a talk at Texas Cyber Summit. And I do remember you giving that talk. They actually, I think it was either 2018 or 2019, they had to open up 2 slots because the first one was so crowded. So they gave you a second time slot to give the same talk. I thought that was pretty cool. But yeah, so such a wild background. I see hints of what they call the standard path to security, like the sysadmin work. But we kind of can go a little bit further back into your CAD days, because that still requires some type of technical knowledge, troubleshooting, some thought processes there. Do you feel like that kind of shaped your interest in security? Did you have any interest in security at that time, or was it kind of just like you hadn't even heard of it yet and you didn't see it until you got to sysadmin work?
Yeah, I've never even heard of security, because that's kind of how I got I got interested in, the computer side of things or sysadmin things, because the companies I worked for, a lot of the companies didn't even have IT. They'd hire other, outside consultants to come in and do the work. So yeah, at that point, I had not heard of security. I didn't hear of security until I was doing sysadmin work. And probably some of my earliest exposures to that was whenever I was at the mortgage company as a sysadmin. We had some consultants come in to put in these new firewalls. Before that, they had like Cisco Pix firewalls, and they replaced that with a CyberGuard firewall, which was used a lot in government. So this was like, so we had some old. This was actually before Compact got bought out by HP, or actually the other way, yeah, before Compact got bought out by HP, and they had their ProLiant series servers. And I remember building those servers out and putting multi-port network adapters in those to set up the firewall. And CyberGuard firewall is used like a, I think it was like, try to think of it as SCO Linux. It used a hardened version of SCO Linux or something along those lines, or some BSD Unix. I think it was, yeah, it was SCO Unix or some other type of BSD Unix that was hardened, that you had to authenticate at different levels to do different things in that system. So to do things on a network level, you had to authenticate at this certain level. And the people doing the work, they did a lot of work for the government. So it was pretty interesting seeing that firewall get set up. And then eventually I moved into the group that was managing that firewall. And at the time, the network administrators were the ones managing the firewalls. And then eventually they started a security group. And so that's when I kind of got interested in security. And then when I was doing the AppSec work, especially there, was interested in the pen testing side of things. So, but there really wasn't as much back then. Nowadays there's so many different roles. I mean, back then you had, nowadays I think they refer to it a lot more often as operations security, the network security side of things. But yeah, like network security, we had an AppSec team. I don't know how long that had been a thing, but now the threat hunting, and you have people managing SIMs, you have people, SOCs and all this stuff. So there's a lot more now than what there was back then, which is great and makes it more interesting. Everyone wants to be a pen tester, but I really think people that are trying to get into this field should really take a look at all the options out there, because they may find something they like. Pen testing seems like it might be the coolest, but there's other things out there that are equally as interesting as pen testing.
100% agree. It is crazy how many of these career areas of security have like kind of sprouted up over the last like 10 years. It's pretty cool, because it's our skill set, even as offensive security people, our skill set is transferable to the defensive side. And likewise, may have to do a little bit of training, but the options are there to kind of pivot around to different types of roles. As most of us have probably had different roles in security and IT. So, you said you were a sysadmin back then. I've talked to a lot of people who want to get into security, and they're always kind of like, hesitant about making the jump, because, they're one of 3 sysadmins at their small company they work for. I'm like, well, first off, are you doing the vulnerability scans? Are you applying the patches? Are you securing the environment? Well, there you go. You're getting security experience. And it's funny because, with how things have expanded so much, we kind of, a lot of people in like the traditional IT roles probably think, oh, they're not doing any security work at all. But, it seems like they're actually doing security work. It's just not labeled as that. But I was kind of curious on your take on that, because, as a sysadmin and a previous sysadmin myself, I feel like I was doing a lot of security work. It just wasn't, that obvious.
Yeah, because we did, system hardening of the operating systems, and like you mentioned, applying patches and dealing with antivirus, because back then a lot of the stuff wasn't as automated. Because I remember, I'm trying to remember if it's Code Red or NIMDA, the virus hit our network, and we didn't have anything in place to do any kind of automation or try to remove viruses. So this was all by hand, and we had hundreds of Windows NT servers we had like NT 4.0, and yeah, I think I'm trying to think if 2000 to come out yet. If 2000 might have just come out, so the majority of our environment was NT 4.0. So just trying to troubleshoot some of those things. So yeah, I agree, and that's kind of what got me interested, because it's funny, I had that mindset to want to get into security before I got into security, because back when they came out with like the security templates and stuff for Windows, be able to apply security templates, I thought that was really interesting, and I did that. And through trial and error, sometimes I would lock things down too good where people couldn't do things. So yeah, there's a good experience that way. And sometimes there's more to securing operating systems than they are just sometimes managing a firewall.
Oh, for sure. It gets wildly complex depending on how deep you want to go. It's funny because when you're talking about how you were restricting your network so much in one of your jobs, I was like, man, that sounds like a zero trust environment. You must authenticate to do every step. All right. Okay, so we've kind of covered a lot about your background, but I always like to do this with when I'm doing the topic of the interviews, right? I kind of want to know, what is your definition of pen testing or penetration testing?
Yeah, it's kind of what, one of the definitions I use in some of my talks and stuff. It's performing a security assessment using techniques of an adversary, of a malicious actor. And I like to differentiate, because the media has made hacker out to be a bad thing, and hacking is not a bad thing if you've got permission. So doing a security assessment using, threat actor techniques. And one of the things I like to describe when people generically compare all of offensive cybersecurity as, red team, which, you being a specialist, the difference there. But the way I like to compare the two is, with penetration testing, you're looking for all the vulnerabilities and trying to exploit every vulnerability you can exploit. Whereas like red teaming, you're trying to find one or two exploits that would lead to like a breach type scenario. You may have more than one. That way, if you you lose that first way in, you've got another way in. So that's kind of like the way I like to describe that. So it's, one of the good ways to describe it is like, ethical hacking is usually what I use to tell people that are not in the industry that ask me what I do. Because when you tell them I'm a penetration tester or I'm a pen tester, they just kind of look at you strange, and they think maybe you work for an ink pen company testing pens.
Classic, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you kind of have to keep it high level, right, with the ethical hacking
Mhm.
until they learn the actual details of the industry.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, I think that's a great breakdown, and it does come up often, right? People who are especially starting out in security, they're just learning the definitions, right? So they're not really too clear on the things that differentiate between red teaming and pen testing, and then even inside the kind of application security space, because in a sense you do need an offensive mindset for that kind of work as well. um, do you find that you're encountering a lot of individuals or organizations, and maybe even in your consulting days, that were kind of confused on the two different definitions?
Oh yes. Yeah. I worked for a company as a red team lead, and basically we handled all the network pen test and adversary emulation, and we had outside companies doing our web app pen testing, because there was such a high volume of apps that need to be tested. And even within the security organizations, people did not understand the difference between vulnerability scanning, vulnerability assessment, pen test, or adversary emulation. At one point, I had a director at that company that he wanted a company to come in and do a red team engagement on an SAP application. So yeah, I find that there's a lot of that. I think there's a lot of lack of understanding, in the industry, and all that's going to depend on the maturity of someone's vulnerability management program, on how well they understand that. And I think it's important for everyone to be able to understand that and understand the need, because there's too many times you run into these other groups. You're doing testing for PCI, and people only think, oh, it's not PCI, we don't need to pen test it. And PCI is just one of the compliance things that you need to take care of, but you need to make sure things are secure. Which always also leads me to something I want to share is, when you're doing these type of things, make sure that security is at the forefront, and that compliance is just kind of side effect of it, of doing that. So you're going through and things are secure, and you're able to check that off because you've done the things required for PCI, but don't just rely on compliance to keep you from getting breached. And there's probably, it would be interesting to know how many companies were PCI compliant, truly compliant, that got breached.
Yeah, did they check the box, right?
Yeah.
Do you
Yeah.
find that, so with kind of your wide set of experience on both internal and external teams, do you find that there's always that battle between security and convenience, right? The convenience for the end user to accomplish their business task versus, balancing that security posture of the organization?
Yes. in my experience, most times, and I understand that business needs to continue, but there's times that people just totally forget about the security side of things. And one of the big areas that's tough. And too, I worked for a company that had an OT and ICS environment. If you think it's bad in other environments, get in those environments because they've got this big blanket excuse. Someone could get killed, and if this machine malfunctions, or we could lose millions of dollars. So a lot of them, they got the business buy-in, and when you got the company backing you because it's going to affect the bottom line, then they're going to get the backup they need sometimes to prevent you from doing what you need to do.
Yeah, we're those of us with experience, we're not fools. We know that, money makes the world go round. And at the end of the day, you're protecting a business that generates a profit, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But yeah, the ICS, I don't really talk much about it because I haven't had an ICS person on here yet. But yeah, that's the scary part of security to me, is like you were saying, if something malfunctions, someone's life could be in danger. And I mean, I don't want to talk too much about the news, but with the recent like Colonial Pipeline hack, I know there's still kind of details left open-ended about that, but that stuff's pretty scary, right?
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. And then when you think about, some of the ICS applications in your SCADA that's controlling like power generation and water treatment plants and all this, how those things can be affected, that is where it really gets scary too. And one of the things I'd say that's a good selling point for anyone in security that's trying to get a penetration test done, if you go through a pen test and even further, like adversary emulation, you're able to possibly detect things that could lead to like ransomware. So that, as a lot of these techniques are things that we use as offensive security professionals that some of these adversaries are using. So I think that's a good selling point there, that I was recently talking to someone, and I think that's a good way to say, hey, you need to secure these things because, if you're worried about keeping business going and the money rolling, then you're going to need to make sure you're not victim to ransomware. And one of the ways to do that is to do pen tests or adversary emulations to make sure that those type of techniques that are being used by people doing the ransomware attacks are mitigated.
Oh, 100% agree. Yeah. And that kind of brings up, a threat intelligence piece, right? Because on the adversary emulation side and even the red teaming side, it's primarily focused on replicating a known threat actor or a group of threat actors. And even it's interesting to see kind of the back and forth, even on the pen testing side, where you're not really focused on replicating a specific threat actor, but you're using, newer TTPs or the TTPs that get the job done kind of thing. And then it's interesting seeing in the threat reports, the threat actors several months later using the same tools and the same techniques. And so, yeah, if anything, that's, take that threat intelligence to your company or your whoever decides on the pen test or the red team engagements, and say, hey, the company will be a target based on this information. Okay, I don't want to get too much into that because we could probably talk about that for an hour, I think. So let's get back into kind of the career path questions, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So from your perspective, and this is why I'm glad I have you on this episode, because you're one of the best people to ask these questions. So what skills do you think are important for cybersecurity and the role that you have for penetration testing?
Yeah, some of the things there are just some of the basic technology, understanding operating systems, basic networking, because anything you're going to protect, you need to know how, anything you're going to test or protect, you've got to understand how that technology works. And so as a pen tester, we have to know, you need to understand how that technology works and how to protect it to be able to break into it. And even the same thing as a defender, they need to understand how it works. And I think too many times people skip into the security side and they forget things. So the better Windows and Linux, and the better you can harden and defend it, the better you're going to be able to attack it as a penetration tester and as a, even, other type of defensive roles, be able to protect against it, the better you understand it. Because, some of the best pen testers I know, one of the things they'll do As they're working on a pen test, they find some new application or new technology they haven't tested before. One of the first things they'll do is they'll find a manual and read up on it, figure out how it works. So having a good base knowledge, you can't know everything, but once you build that base up, then you can test almost anything. You know, if you know a little bit about hardware hacking, a little bit about web app, because a lot of your administrative systems on networks are using some kind of web interface. Your IoT stuff use some kind of web management piece. So the more of those basics you understand, the more things you can test. And once you learn those things, then you can expand that. Once you know how to defend or attack those things, then you can expand it onto new technologies too.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it sounds like you're saying it comes down to those like kind of foundational skills of understanding operating systems and even understanding how networks work. Because I see a lot of security individuals or new individuals going from IT or just going from straight to school to infosec. They're wanting to focus on the cloud, right? And as you and I both know, cloud pen testing or cloud red teaming is a thing because every company is almost adopting some form of cloud for their infrastructure or for their business operations. But I see a lot of people trying to jump straight into that without foundational skills. And I often tell them, hey, those networking skills you build on a traditional network, they translate well to the cloud environment. Do you see people kind of getting that confusion, thinking they can jump straight into cloud, or have you encountered that at all?
Yeah, I've seen that, just like a lot of other things, just like pen testing, someone wanting to jump right in. And mind you, I think people can jump into whatever roles, but just make sure you have the underlying education. Doesn't mean that you have to spend 6 years as a sysadmin like I did, because really where I learned the most of what I learned was probably the first half of that. And after that, it's just kind of learning a few new things. So yeah, I see a lot of people doing that. And I see also sometimes people getting disappointed that they want to be a pen tester and they have to start out in a SOC. Don't, any kind of experience you get is going to help as a pen tester. I mean, it helps build up base knowledge and understandings of other things. I mean, working on a help desk, dealing with people, working in a call center, building those people skills are helpful. And some of the things you learn there. I mean, if you're doing social engineering, then sometimes IT experience is a good pretext. I was doing a social engineering engagement where I was the one doing the pretext calling. So I was calling them up, portraying like a help desk person saying, hey, we rolled out some patches. We don't know if everyone got patched. So go to this website and log in with your credentials and it'll do a scan of your system to see if the patch is missing. And funny, while that was going on, I was able to play that off because I worked as a sysadmin and I've, done some phone support with some of our end users. And I had someone come up and say, hey, I'm having this email problem. And I recently ran across this Outlook problem myself where it was not connecting. So I was able to walk them through some things. And so they thought it was a legit help desk person they were talking to. So any of this stuff, and even in our book, Kim came up with some great ideas of showing how if you're working in customer service in different areas, that stuff can be helpful.
Yeah, all those background skills play a huge part in security, even if you don't come from a security background or your traditional IT background. So I don't want to dive too much in that because this leads to the perfect segue to the next question. And I kind of already think I know the answer to this. Do you think there is one standard path that someone should take to get into security or pen testing?
Yeah, I really don't think so. I mean, I think some of the basics, the foundations, like we were mentioning, having those foundational skills, and someone might be interested in being a web app pen tester. Maybe they're interested in network pen testing, and they may come from more of a development background. Maybe they're like a DevOps person or something like that. Then that would be ideal to move into that. So they may not have to spend all that time learning those other things. So I don't think it's a standard path. I mean, because everyone's experiences kind of help. I mean, the thing too with security is like when you talk about hiring diverse staffs, that people come in with different mindsets and helpful. Same thing with security or pen testing. People come in from different areas and they have different experiences and they're able to do things in a different way that the others may not.
100% agree. And I always throw this out there because a couple friends of mine, but some of the best infosec professionals I know came from an aircraft maintenance background. And also one of them was a cop too. So, it just shows you that like those skills you gain in different career fields play a big role in how you think and how you process things, and you just add the technical skills on there because technical skills always seem to change or being always updated. Those that mindset is always there. uh, I I always love bringing that up because I think it's crazy because
Yeah.
I kind of came from a traditional background like yourself. Like I had an IT and sysadmin background, so I assumed like this was the path to getting into security. And then I ran into those people when I was a SOC analyst, and they told me about their background and where they came from, and I'm like, well, my eyes are open.
Yeah. I've known of people that went in from the social engineering aspect, so they were good with people. I knew someone that turned out to be a really good social engineer. They were a journalist, and she had a knack for be able to get in places to talk to people, just be able to persuade people, and just kind of understanding psychology. Started out there and then went and took like some pen testing courses and got GPen certified, and we were able to do other things past that. So I mean, people's entry points can always be different places. And just one thing is, just don't get discouraged, get out there and try. Because I've had students before that came in the first day of class and said, I want to be as good as you or better, but in less time. Can I do that? So yeah, I said, you can do it as quick as you want to. Just the amount of time you're willing to put into it, how hard you're going to work. You can get in there quicker or slow as you want. And I said, you can do it. And then 2 weeks later, he comes in and tells me, do I need to read the textbook to become a pen tester? And so I'm thinking to myself, well, maybe you don't want to know, you don't want it bad enough, but I didn't say that. And I said, yeah, you need to spend especially more time with the hands-on stuff, and you can get there. And this guy came up probably 6 months later, maybe a year later, and got a job as a pen tester. And I never would have discouraged him from it. I was really surprised he got it, but that's one of the things I really try to make sure is to not, there's enough negative that we put on ourselves, and there's enough barriers to try to get into a job. And, we don't need to put on ourselves and anyone I'm trying to help or mentor. I don't like to, there's pros and cons to things or things to watch out for. And I really just try to avoid that, because you put that self-doubt in someone's head, then it can prevent them from getting somewhere. You really look at one of the best things I saw recently was a meme that said something about be as confident or be as ambitious as a 4-year-old wearing a Batman shirt. So, I mean, when you're little like that, you think you can do anything. And so that's the kind of attitude you want to get. Once you start putting that self-doubt in your head, that's what holds you back and prevents you from reaching your goals.
That is such great advice, because as you've seen applying for jobs, people list, or organizations list, their dream sheet. And I can imagine people with no experience looking at that and thinking, how the heck am I going to get that much experience to get a job? And I think it's important to keep that mindset, just go for it. Don't give up, just keep trying. Because honestly, you may be surprised what happens when you submit those resumes. So you mentioned certs, so that kind of leads into my next question. What are your thoughts on degree versus certs for the area of security you work in?
From what I've seen, there's not as many people that have the certs, so I don't think it's a requirement. But one of the things I would say, certs versus degrees. I mean, I don't know if I said that, but degrees, I really don't see very many people really needing degrees. A lot of people not having it, or maybe they had something totally outside of IT at all. You really don't need it, but I think it depends on the person's way of learning. So if you learn really well with structured type learning, traditional learning, then I would go with what works best for you. Some people are better at self-taught or the hands-on self-paced CBT type stuff, or like the OSCP type certifications. That works well for some and it doesn't work well for others. And the thing about certifications, they're going to help you get your foot in the door. But if you know what you're doing and you learn, if you get like that OSCP level knowledge without the certification, you can talk your way through an interview, explain how to do a pen test. If you're given a hands-on lab to perform a pen test against or to hack into, if you're able to do and describe those things, you don't have to have the certifications. It's just sometimes makes it easier to get your foot in the door and get started. Because I know some awesome pen testers and red teamers that have 0 certifications and never taken any of those courses. It's all just been self-study and hands-on. So just like the path in, it's the same thing with education. There's no same path. It's just whatever works best for you. And one of the things I just kind of really recently thought about too, as far as certifications goes, and one of the ways to look at those was, certifications, just like degrees, because you go to certain colleges and you took this A plus certification or this security plus certification X amount of years ago. Some colleges like WGU won't take anything that's older than 5 years old. So the industry has looked at degrees like your degree could be 10 years old and people really don't say much about it. But when you figure a college is turned down credits based on that, we really need to look at that. And also, when you look at certifications, that's kind of like a point in time assessment of someone's skills. So if you do your OSCP now and you don't say, like, at the time you're going through CTFs, doing a lot of hands-on stuff in labs, and you don't touch that for a long time, maybe you're working in IT, you leave it alone, you lose some of the skills, then you're not at that same level when you apply for that job. So I think that's really where vetting people really needs to be looked at. Companies that have the lab set up to vet people, to have them perform some type of practical test, because, like I said, sometimes you lose those skills.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. If you don't use it, you lose it.
Yeah.
And what I like to tell people is, like, if they include something on their resume, be prepared to talk about it. Right. I
Mhm.
always give an example of where I failed. I included a programming language. I had wrote like a couple payloads in, but I was definitely no developer. Right. And I got asked on I think it was like a red team engineer position, because I was really shooting for it. And I got asked about that language or something specific about it. And I could not answer it. And I told them I don't know. I'd have to do research on it. But I learned the hard way of, only include what you can confidently talk about on there.
That's true too, because whenever you build out your LinkedIn profile or your resume, that's going to be a guide for who's interviewing. And it's not like, there are some people that like to be really hard at interviewing people, really want to make it difficult. There's some people that, just like there's some professors in universities that like to make their course hard and difficult. But one of the things is, as an interviewer, we're going to look at these resumes and we're trying to get an idea of what you know. So if you put a lot of things on there you don't know, then that's going to make you look bad. It's also directing the difficulty of your interview. So if you've opened up Burp Suite, but you're not comfortable with it, then you may not want to put that on your resume if you don't want to end up answering a bunch of Burp Suite questions.
Yeah. That can get pretty hectic pretty quickly. Make an interview pretty awkward. But yeah, this leads perfect into my next question. So if you were interviewing for someone for your role or for a pen testing role, what is something you would ask them, or a primary question you would ask them?
One of the things I'd like to ask them is just kind of what they're doing to study or learn that, along with finding out what their experience is. Because one of the things I take in consideration is, like, the team I'm on now, we'll bring people in, and if they've got security experience or some kind of IT experience, and give them a chance. So for me, it's really just getting understanding of that basic knowledge and figuring out whether they could do the role, trained to do the role. Now, if it's someone more senior, then you're going to look at them, be able to perform pen tests and ask, questions specific to that. But one of the things I like to do too when I'm interviewing people, I think one of the things as the industry really need to be better about is, make the interviews as less stressful as possible, because a lot of people that are super sharp are very timid and they don't do well under pressure. Doesn't mean they're not going to do well. If they're blue team in an incident, they may function properly, but when they're being interviewed and questioned, a lot of our type of folks are socially awkward and introverts. So you really want to know the person's skills. So you really want to make that environment as comfortable as possible. And I think the vetting process, let someone perform a pen test against, a target, and then explain the pen test and how they did it, and go about that way, figure out how they think, and find out their true skill set. Because I think when you're just the high pressured interview, you're going to miss some people, because the thing you look at is not all of us know how to use every exploit. That a lot of times we have to Google it. We have to go back and look. We may have really good notes because, you're not always using the same exploits all the time. So you take note of that so you can go back and use that again later on. So that has to be taken in consideration. And when you bring someone into an interview, they've got none of their notes, no access to any of that stuff. They can't Google it. That's difficult. So if they can find the answer, that's what really should matter, opposed to everything that they've got memorized, can just recall like that. That's not happening very often.
Yeah, that's such great advice, because as you've probably been through them, I've been through some really grueling interview processes. I've been through job interviews where it was like 8 interviews in a row, with technical interviews sprinkled out throughout that entire marathon. And then I've been through some. It's been 3 interviews, very chill, scenario-based questions, and the team really clicked, right? But I think that comes down to kind of what you're saying, how people need to be a little more chill and not as like stress inducing during the interview process, because uh, are you trying to break the person you're going to be working with? You know what I mean? Like find their mental breaking point. I never really understood that interview style, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like a lot of things old school. They just kind of need to go away. People need to think a different way. And then, when you're dealing with younger generations and stuff, I'm 55 years old, and I don't say this right, but back some of the older generations I would work for, they would just kind of expect you to be able to take whatever and all this and man up type of mentality. And people need to get away from that, because those type of attitudes and stuff have caused some of the mental health issues that we've seen over the years. And you make a workplace a stressful environment, then sometimes it's hard to get production and good out of your employees. And sometimes if someone's got a leader that's easy to work for, then and that respects them and treats them well, you're going to work hard for them, go the extra mile. I mean, a good example of that was in my sysadmin days. We'd get called in on call from the operations group because something broke, and sometimes we'd go in, it would be not anything in our area, but the manager over that group, he worked days, but we knew that he appreciated what we did. So we'd go in there and fix things, because maybe it wasn't in our area, but we would do it because he was nice to us, respected us, and gave us credit for what we did. So
That's so true. Having a good manager can really make or break the how you feel about a role. I've had good managers and I've had bad managers over the last 10 years. And just like you're saying, the ones who treat you well and care for you, and respect you, you're going to go the extra mile for them.
mm-hmm.
And I think that's, great advice, Phil. So we're towards the end of the interview, and I always like to give the interviewee a chance to do some shout outs, or, hey, follow me, or check out this. We've already talked about your amazing book, that I'm sure everyone watching probably has a copy of, I hope. So do you have any shout outs you want to make?
Yeah. Innocent Lives Foundation. If you need a good organization that you're wanting to donate money to or time, they look for volunteers. And, we're coming up pretty soon. It's either October or November is usually the giving month, and most companies will match what you donate. So they're really a really good organization. Innocent Lives Foundation helps unmask anonymous child predators. And, nowadays where kids aren't able to get out and play with their friends as much because of the pandemic and stuff, then kids are online more, so they need to be protected. And so Innocent Lives Foundation uses volunteers that use open source intelligence to try to track down these offenders and turn that information over to law enforcement. So it costs money to build these cases, as well as for the operations of the organization. So it's a really good organization. And also a shout out to Hacking is Not a Crime. I'm associated with that organization. I'm an advocate for them. And they're just trying to basically educate the media and the public to let them know that hacking is used for professional purposes and good, not just bad. It's just like a gun or being a locksmith. You could pick locks to break into houses and that sort of thing, do things illegally, or you could do it legally. And so it's kind of the same thing. Hacking is a skill that can be used for good or bad. And Hacking is Not a Crime is just trying to get the media to use different terminology like cyber criminal, threat actor, or that sort of thing for the cyber criminals, instead of calling everyone hackers.
Great shout outs, Phil. I will put all of those links in the description so you can go support those organizations, and I really encourage you to. And it's interesting that you bring up Hacking is Not a Crime, because over the last few years, at least in mainstream articles, I've seen kind of the shift from using hacker terminology to criminal or cyber bad guy. Not really is what they would say, but yeah, it seems like it's slowly happening. But those aren't as catchy as saying company X got hacked by these hackers, but we'll get there eventually, I think.
Yeah, one of the people that were kind of on the forefront of all that has been like Chris Roberts, because before Hacking is Not a Crime came along, I would see him correct people on LinkedIn. So it was good that this organization, because when it started out, Brian McInish, the one of the co-founders, when he started out, he was handing out stickers at the 2018 DEF CON. And basically it was just more or less an awareness type campaign that said hacking's not a crime. And then Chloe Mustagi partnered with him. And so she's worked in politics at some point in her career, and she's a really good advocate. So she's for hackers' rights and stuff and bringing awareness, and has worked a lot with lawmakers and the media to get this information out there. So the two of them joining in that effort, and then the things that Chloe brought to it have been really good and help get visibility. Because I think most media people want to say it the right way and do the right thing, but there are going to be some of those, like you said, it's a lot more dramatic. It sells the story better if you say hacker opposed to cyber criminal, and it's more relatable. Like I said, like ethical hacker is easier to explain than penetration tester or pen tester.
100% agree. Well, Phil, I just wanted to say thank you so much for joining me today. I'm sure all the insight you provided will help tons of people with their journey into cybersecurity and, of course, ultimately into penetration testing. So once again, thank you so much, Phil. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It was an honor.
Thank you so much for checking out that interview with Philip. I'm going to put all of the links in the description below that he mentioned, and of course his Twitter, so you can check out him and his book.